struggle between the United States and Europeans, and the United States, the Western Alliance, and the former Soviet Union, China, Russia, and so on, is it the system, does it help or not? Now, I look at also decision makers' political will with the aim. Those who take decisions. If there is no political will to reform, to build, to change, to adapt, to adjust, whatever can be done, it will be only ink on paper. It will dry up tomorrow. But there must be political will and also a cadre, bureaucracy, trained one, skilled one, that can implement. Now, lastly, I would like to say, we come back again. Now, in conclusion, as never before, have nation states and the world been in need of reconsidering domestic and foreign policy formulation and conduct in terms of ending war and conflict, thinking of how best the democratization of process tied to maintaining sovereignty of nation states, preserving human rights without any form of foreign intervention, and restructuring the world political system as the need is today. Today we are more in need of all this. Now, foreign policy makers are indeed in need of embarking on formulating a new approach to assess costs of war and conflict. Unearth past experiences to guide them how to constitute reliable and credible drivers for dialogue and negotiations. Based on diplomacy as effective methods for solving problems. You know, when the events of Arab Spring starts in Syria, for example, all of a sudden, there was no really that tough. Europeans, Arabs, and so on, closed their embassies, and they closed, meaning they abandoned the role of diplomacy. When you abandon the role of diplomacy, you closed all doors of dialogue and negotiations. That closing of all doors of negotiations can come in the very, very, very end, late stage. But unfortunately, because the plan, which I can call it conspiracy plan, yes it is, was to go ahead, then they close it. And there was no dialogue, no negotiations up till now. Now they are coming back. And now we say, oh yes, it's good to talk, it's good to bring back, open our embassies, but why, diplomatic channels, even worrying, states maintain a channel for dialogue and for negotiations. Now, said that, it's a longer journey. The road ahead is thorny, bearing in mind that the more you put to it for reform and pay, of course not to Trump, the more you will get out of it, which means you will be able to find a way out. And that way out, that will you will get out of it safe, sound, intact, dignified, and and honest. There is no other option for any state but to adjust, to reform, to think rationally, and to act. It is simply, as Hamlet said, what did he say? To be or not to be. This is the question. And I will leave you to ask questions after I introduce the ambassador of Lebanon. It was a quick, I know. This is not what was in the plan, because that I will send it to you to read and then to raise other questions when you arrive. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend, Ambassador of Lebanon, Rabie Narsh. Lebanon, I have many relatives in Lebanon. My sisters, my uncles, and Lebanese, as the president said, we are one people, but in two countries. Yeah, that. And Lebanon is very dear. It is said, and still to be said, it is the Switzerland or the Paris of the Middle East. But Lebanon, I believe, has what makes it rich is this diversity of the culture of the people. Now, this diversity of culture could be positive and could be negative in sometimes, unless there is a kind of system. The war in Lebanon started, as you explained, one of the negative repercussions of October War and the success of the Arabs in the fight for the liberation of their occupied lands and also the restoration of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. One of the repercussions was, oh my God, Europeans thought, what is this? The Arabs really, if they are united, they can fight and they can liberate and they can encourage other liberation movements. So we better contain them. And how to contain them is to create certain conflict. You remember I said the first one was 1974 in the war, Turkish invasion of the northern part. The second was 75, 76 problems and the civil war. In Morocco, Algeria, again 75, Syria. So there were success, good, positive repercussions, consequences of October War, but there were also drawback. And that drawback was the first country in the region that suffered a lot, and the people of Lebanon suffered a lot, is the Lebanon. That lasted for 16 years. And then our ambassador will tell us the story, and then the Taif agreement was able to be decided upon, bringing back peace, security and stability and reconciliation. And I remember President Bush, the father, after the reconciliation of Lebanon came up, visited Syria. And when he visited Syria, President Hafiz al-Assad received him. And he said to him, and I was the interpreter at that time, and he said, it was November. And in November, normally, it's cold, windy, climate. But it was sunshine. He said, Mr. President, I'm very pleased to be here in Damascus. Now, you see, after this nice situation in the region, there is also a nice weather. President Assad said to him, you are not responsible for the good weather. It is the act of God. You are responsible for making war, if you wanted, and for not visiting countries, but after you leave. That's a longer story. But the Taif agreement, in the end of the day, was concluded, which is still, I believe, functioning. And let's see what the ambassador will say, how did the Lebanese people, government, also manage to rebuild the state, to govern, how to their political decisions in the foreign and the Arab, international and regional, and how that would be affecting Lebanon. And Lebanon will be affected by what's happening. Mr. Ambassador, please take the floor.
Thank you, Professor. And before politically, I want to introduce the beauty of Lebanon. Allow me to sit, please. Can I, please? So a short clip about some facts about Lebanon. So, okay, I think it's enough because to save your time. This is part of the beauty of Lebanon, and this is the lecture. Any questions? So let me start with now I need the help here. Lebanon, is the place where East meets the West. Lebanon is at the crossroad of three continents, Africa, Europe, and Asia. This strategic location has, of course, made Lebanon a somehow controversial place that all civilization, or most of them at least, crossed path into Lebanon. That left Lebanon with that had become land of culture and diversity of 18 different religious sects. You know, Lebanese population is less than 5 million, 4 plus. With this small population, it's like small neighborhood in Delhi. But despite that, we have 18 different religious sects, Islam and Christianity. And we have few ethnicities. Of course, most are Arab, but we have Armenian, we have Kurds, Turkmen, and others. And also in Lebanon, politically, like there are dozens of ideologies, affiliations, and dogmas. So normally with such plural society, with such a diverse society, there always a need to a special form of government, special form of democracy to run the state affairs. Political scientists and authors have come with the term of constitutional democracy. Constitutionalism or constitutional democracy, I think some of you have heard of it, of course, during your study. What is briefly constitutionalism? Besides, it's a word that's hard to pronounce sometimes, but it is mainly a form of democracy that meant to, like we write here, regulate the power sharing in a plural society. When the society is diverse, there should be something called constitutional democracy. The constitutional democracy is composed, or there are 4 dimensions of it. Grand coalition, which means that all the components or the leaders of the components of society should come into certain understanding, a coalition. And mutual veto, that every component of this society, they have the right to veto any decision, that no decision can come except for a consensus after the agreement of all the components of the society. Proportionality, in the sense that all the components of the society should be represented in the parliament or in the government, in all the institution, in the constitutional institution of a state, but in proportional rate according to their number. Autonomy, there's a unity, of course, in the state, but each component, they should have their own autonomy and running their own affairs, particularly religious affairs. So these 4 elements, how are they represented in Lebanon? Actually, Lebanon has always been run through constitutional democracy. Because Lebanon is the first society, there was no majority in Lebanon. We are all like group of minorities. So that's why constitutionalism was the best idea of governing Lebanon. Before 1943, here I'll come back to 1943, but since the creation of Lebanon, or of Greater Lebanon, as we know now, it's in 1920, Lebanon, and even before that, let's say even during the Ottoman Empire, as Professor Amoura mentioned, in the 16th century, the Ottoman rule came to a special, I think you know our Syrian friends here and brothers and sisters, they came with a certain rule that because Lebanon was mainly, the core of Lebanon was Mount Lebanon, which is mostly populated by Druze and Christian Maronites. Druze are a small faction of Islam, and Maronite are a faction of Christianity. To govern Mount Lebanon, they came with certain proportional and consensual form of government, which was, again, like, it was not called constitutionalism because this word was devised or mainly used after World War II, when political scientists came up with this word. But since 1920, Lebanon has been run by constitutional democracy. So in 1943, that was the year of independence of Lebanon. Lebanon took its independence from the French in 1943. During the French mandate, there were like the Muslims in Lebanon in general, they felt like sidelined. You know, the French mostly favored Christian, not because they love the Lebanese Christian, but because they think that they are the link between them and the West, and they think that through them they can always have their word and they can interfere in the Lebanese affairs. So at that time there was somehow a kind of displeasure between the Muslim community, and the national identity was not that strong in Lebanon. So the National Pact come, the 2 leaders of the Muslim community and the Christian community. The first, National Pact was an unwritten agreement it's not written, it's not a constitution, it's not a law, it's an unwritten agreement between the first president of Lebanon at that time, Bishara al-Khoury, he was a Christian, Maronite, and the first prime minister, Riyad al-Salah, he was a Sunni Muslim. The two leaders came to understanding that, okay, we understand that there's some mistrust or distrust between some factions of the community of Lebanon and the foreigners, the French and other, of course, we not neglect the role of the Americans and the British and all the foreign powers there. They play into the fissures of the society in Lebanon. So they came into understanding that, okay, we need to this pact or this national pact should alleviate the Christians' fear of being dominated by Muslims, because Christians were minority, and they think that if they merge into all the Arab world, they would be very small and they will melt. So alleviate the Christians' fear of being dominated by Muslims and the Muslims' fear of Western hegemony. In the sense that Christians will not seek the foreign protection, as was the case during the French Mandate, and in return, Muslims would recognize Lebanon's independence, Lebanon's final status, as it was in 1943, and accept the boundaries of the Greater Lebanon of 1920, and renounce demands of unity with Syria or the national Arab or the pan-Arabism. Because at that time, in 1920, when Lebanon was created, there were some parts of Lebanon that think we are more related to pan-Arabism or to Syria, and then they would not that keen or that, I mean, the national identity was not that Lebanese for them, it was pan-Arabism. So that national pact came as reconciliation between these two factions in Lebanon, confessions, Muslim and Christian, in the way that they can okay, Lebanon is our country, this is our end country, and we should, the identity should be Lebanese, but again, we should not get the protection of the Western. At that time, again, it was not written. I will stress on that point. The agreement was the power sharing. Power sharing in the sense that the presidency, the top post of the state, was given to a Maronite Christian. So till now, our president is a Maronite Christian. The prime ministership is a Muslim Sunni. And the speakership, means the president of the parliament, is Muslim Shiite, is a faction of Shiite. So this allocation of power, of course, also the other minorities like Druze and Alawite and Christian Orthodox or Anglican, they all have certain power sharing. But I mean, the three top posts were given to the three bigger minorities, again, I say, in Lebanon. Also, not only the top posts, but again, the parliament seats and cabinet seats were also divided, or I would say allocated, to other confessions in the ratio of 6-5. At that time, it was favoring the Christians. So for every 6 Christian MP, member of parliament, for example, 5 goes to the Muslim, also in the cabinet, in the government as well. Minorities, like I said, also were represented in the cabinet occasionally, but in the parliament, they were always represented. So the national pact did work, actually. The distrust was a little bit alleviated, and it worked for a while. So there was some kind of smooth democratization process in Lebanon after 1943. And the main issue is that there was the democratic system with some faults, of course. It's not perfect democratic system, but at least it prohibits the formation of authoritarian regime. And you know, the Middle East was then run by military regimes, most of them. So Lebanon was, in that sense, different than other regimes in the area. It was kind of democratic regime, but of course it has its faults. The agreement, by the way, between the president, the Maronite president, and the Sunni prime minister was temporary. It was not forever. That's why they did not write it. That's why it was, how can I say, oral agreement or mutual agreement. It was not written in the constitution. But this temporary agreement, it runs up to date. So it's been more than 70 years, and we still have the same system of temporary system. Um, what happened is that this pact, the national pact or confessionalism and consocialism in the political structure was so deeply rooted that frequent political disputes were erupted from time to time in Lebanon. And the national identity that was supposed to be fortified, it failed to create the strong national identity. It's still, some people were not so convinced with this formula that the two leaders came with. The status quo was maintained in the sense that the religious sects, every religious sect has its own privileges. They kept their own privileges. And sometimes the institutions of religious sects were stronger than the institution of the state itself. And that was a great drawback in the political system of Lebanon. So all in all, I wrote here that history and geography both collaborated against stability and peace in Lebanon. History in the sense of the development of the issues in Lebanon, and geography in the sense that, like I said, the strategic position of Lebanon among bigger states and among the turmoil of the Middle East area, they all affected Lebanese stability. And then the war started to simmer, both for internal factors and external factors. For the internal factors, I would mention sectarian division of power. The division of power that allocated every religious sect to a certain share of the power did not work well, because some people were not so much content, especially the Muslim, when they grow in number. They outnumbered the Christian, but they still have the ratio of 6-5 favoring Christian. That created some sense of displeasure, some sense of discontent. So they start to raise the issue of that, no, we need now to change the ratio, or at least we need to come up with a new formula of power sharing. The national identity, like I said, social justice, political economy. Lebanon was liberal economy. It was open to the market economy, as we call it. And that, unlike, again, the other regional systems that were run by rigid socialist economy at that time, again, that gave Lebanon some weakness, some weak points, because lots of interference happened in Lebanon. And the strategic alliance, of course, we all remember the Cold War, which I put also in the external factor. But the strategic alliance in Lebanon, some factions want to ally with the West, some with Syria, some with, in general, the Soviet Union at that time. So that the external factors and internal factors destabilized the stability in Lebanon. The external factors that I would say regional conflict, Israel's occupation to Lebanon, and the continuous aggression of Israel in Lebanon. The Palestine-Israel conflict also, that was a major factor that affected Lebanon's stability, because it affected Lebanon. Many Lebanese factions were felt themselves so much meant into this conflict, and they have to support Palestine or the Palestinians. The Cold War competition, which affects all the region actually and the whole world, also affected Lebanon. Arab nationalism and political Islam also started to play out in Lebanon. In Lebanon, especially after the war ended, we came into a term that's used. It was like the war of others in Lebanon. Of course, Lebanese were the players, or mainly the players of Lebanon, but we had fighters or militias in Lebanon of all nationalities from all the world. So in the sense of alleviating the war and come to reconciliation, we use the word war of others, Harb al-Akharin. Civil war was devastating, like any war. War, like Professor Amoura was saying, war is not a solution for any problem. It left more than 100,000 dead, more than 1 million displaced and migrants. Lebanese are everywhere, not only, of course, because of the civil war now, because during the history they were adventurers. They loved to go through the sea and discover the other world. Then, of course, the shattered infrastructure of Lebanon, political system faltering. Almost it was about a partial state collapse. It, of course, the state of Lebanon never collapsed, never had total failure, but of course war had its heavy hand on Lebanon, and it was like partial conflict. So at that time, what Lebanon needed to get out of this turmoil was to end war activities, stop all the war activities, to start into reconciliation process, and that's the state building that you are studying. And of course, state building. Reconciliation is among the faction, the component of the society, and state building is your study or your course now, and I wouldn't add much on that. How did the war stop? International will to end Lebanon's war. Of course, you know, in small wars, in small countries like Lebanon, the war starts and ends with not only, like I mentioned, not only internal factors, but the external factors have the heavy-handed in starting the war and in ending the war. At that time, in 1980, end of 1980s, the war ended in Lebanon. But before that, I wanted to draw your attention to an important meeting in 1986 between the U.S. President Reagan, at that time Ronald Reagan, and the USSR, Soviet Union, Gorbachev, Mikhail Gorbachev, and Reykjavik in Iceland. In 1986, they met, the two leaders met, but at that time the summit collapsed, it didn't succeed. But then again in 1987, they agree and they sign a nuclear treaty. Of course, you don't remember, but you study. Most of you were not born at that time, but you read about it. And then in 1988, June 1988, they rectified the treaty. So the international conditions were so suitable to start diffuse the regional conflict. Otherwise, before that, there were lots of trials and lots of attempts to solve the Lebanese crisis. You remember Philip Habib initiative, the US initiative, the Arab initiative, Syria, Saudi Arabia. It didn't work because still there were no decision to end the war in Lebanon, I would say. So at that time, in the end of 1980s, in 1989, the decision was taken and Taif conference came out. What's Taif? By the way, Taif is a city in Saudi Arabia. It's almost the summer capital of Saudi in Mecca province. It is the place, the city where the Lebanese politicians and member of parliament, they gathered and had a conference. And the conference took the name after the city. So that's why we call Taif. So when I say Taif, of course I mentioned, I refer to the agreement that was concluded in the Saudi city of Taif in 1989. The Lebanese politician, with the sponsorship of Syria, of Saudi Arabia, of the United States, France, all the regional and international players were there because, like I said, the international ambiance or situation was favored to that conference to be held, and the Taif agreement was held and was succeeded with a certain items. Those items were embodied in the constitution the following year. In 1990, after the Parliament of Lebanon convened, they embodied the amendments that were taken in Taif city into the constitution in 1990. So what's about, again briefly, it's about to access political reforms and external relations. Taif agreement and the amendment relating to Taif agreement changed the system completely in Lebanon. So it is really a turning point in the political life of Lebanon. It, of course, kept the power sharing because power sharing in Lebanon is a must, like I say. Consociationalism is a must in Lebanon. So Taif agreement stressed the fact that there should be power sharing. The national identity was more clarified now because now it is in the constitution. Lebanon is an Arab state. And is a member of the Arab League and member of the United Nations. So the identity is more now clarified with Taif agreement. public liberties, they think about, of course, the international public liberties and the human rights, freedom, and everything, decentralization. Lebanon is too small to be like federal state. It's too small. But they agreed on decentralization, that to give the regions more say in running the state affair. So it's administrative decentralization and not political decentralization. They changed the electoral law and socio-economic reform. Again, Professor, you were mentioning that with the state building, socio-economic reform is a must again. The Taif agreement tackled these issues. External relations, mainly external relations, Taif agreement tackled the relation between Lebanon and Syria, because that relation was somehow controversial in Lebanon before the war and during the war. There were like pro and con the Syrian presence in Lebanon. But then again, Syria was given the authority to implement Taif agreement. So, the role of Syria was again clarified with Taif agreement, that it's not only the military presence of Lebanon. No, Syria would, with the agreement of all the international community, with Saudi Arabia and other Arabs, and the American and the Russian at that time, they agreed to give Syria like the role to monitor the implementation of Taif agreement in Lebanon. The amendments, the particular amendments after the Taif items were embodied in the constitution, came up with these amendments. Some important president's authority or prerogative that were in the hand of the president were given to the Council of Ministers. It's not like, because if you are, especially my Syrian colleagues, they are aware of the fact that before Taif, president was the executive power, not the head of the executive. He was the executive power, the president himself. And like we said, he is Christian Maronite. That caused the sense of displeasure with the Muslim. So Taif agreement did not take the authority from the Maronite president to give it to a Sunni prime minister. No, it takes some, of course, authority from the president, but it entrusted it into the hand of the Council of Ministers, a collective body, not a person, into a collective body. And this is, again, a must, or a condition for constitutionalism. There should be a consensus, a body, collective body, to carry these amendments. Then the speaker's prerogative, who is a Muslim Shiite, is also strengthened. Prime Minister becomes the head of the executive authority, but also he's accountable to Parliament. And the ratio that we spoke about before Taif was 6-5. Now, after Taif, it was 50-50 between Muslim and Christians in Parliament, in cabinet, and also in high-ranking posts. So the power sharing was now total and equal, on equal basis. And by the way, was equally between Muslim and Christian, but proportionally among each faction. For example, Sunni and Shia and Druze, Alawite, Ismailis, these are in the Muslim faction. They have proportional kind of sharing of the posts, and same for the Christians. But between Christian and Muslim, it was 50-50. So what was the rationale of Taif agreement? It was not about actually only like taking some prerogatives from the Maronite president and to entrust it into the Sunni prime minister. It was not about that. It was about enforcing consensualism and enforcing constitutionalism, and give the right and the assurance for every component of the country that you all have your own share of power. So Taif agreement talked about mutual existence. One of the main items in Taif agreement is mutual existence, which is compared to grand coalition in the constitutional democracy. Again, Taif agreement speaks about proper representation of all components, which is proportionality. Executive authority, a collective body, which I mentioned, the Council of Ministers was the collective body to run the executive authority. Here, the Council of Ministers it takes decision by majority and some of them by agreement, by consensual agreement. But if like 1/3 of the ministers disapprove, then no decision can take, especially in important decisions. So that's why it's, of course, not mentioned as a veto in the Constitution, but I mean, because some decisions needed to be taken with 2/3, then it means that the other 1/3 has the veto to oppose any decision. And of course, Taif agreement guarantees religious rights of all factions, and this is compared to autonomy in the constitutional theory. The results of Taif agreement. The result of Taif agreement was the political result. Politically, or in constitutionally, if I would say, the Lebanese political system shifted from semi-presidential or presidential system before Taif agreement into parliamentary system. Now we have parliament, we have cabinet, which is responsible or accountable to the parliament, and parliament that can veto down the cabinet. So it's kind of parliamentary system. But the question is it the genuine parliamentary system that we see in Britain? Is it a classical parliamentary system? This is debatable. This is a long debate, and I don't think it's beyond our lecture today. But again, in parliamentary system, the main, I don't know if you study constitutional studies, the main items or the main requirement of parliamentary system, there should be duality of executive, like the king and the prime minister, or the president and the prime minister, which is the case in Lebanon. There should be the confidence. I mean, the cabinet should take the confidence of the parliament. No cabinet can work without the full confidence of the parliament. Accountability, again, the cabinet should be accountable to the parliament, which, like I said, can veto down the cabinet. And mutual influence tools between legislature and executive. Like the parliament can, like I said, veto down the cabinet also can dissolve the parliament in certain cases. The president and the council of ministers can dissolve the parliament. So there are mutual tools of reference or affecting each other between the executive authority and the legislature, the legislative authority. I come to almost the end, and I would say the Taif agreement results. Taif has ended the war. So Taif is a must in Lebanon. The war ended with Taif agreement. Taif agreement gave assurances to most components of the country, to the Christians and to the Muslims. Everybody was, think that Taif agreement is a guarantee to a stable democracy in Lebanon. But then again, it has its drawbacks. The drawbacks is that first, the confessionalism is still there with the allocation of the three sects to the three top posts, the Christian Maronite, the Sunni, and the Shia. And from time to time in Lebanon, as you might hear, there are difficulties in governance. Like in passing laws in the parliament, it's not sometimes easy to pass laws because of different affiliation in the parliament system, political affiliations, and sometimes opposing. The forming of government is only last month, our government, for example, was formulated after 9 months of deliberation between the political factions in Lebanon. And also in naming a president. Our current president was elected almost 3 years ago. And before that, we had a power vacuum for 2.5 years. We didn't have a president because, again, it was like not easy to agree on a certain figure to occupy this top post of Lebanon. So what I meant is that Taif agreement, of course, is a must. It has its advantages, but then again, it has its drawbacks. Especially with a weak society, with a weak country, a small country in the Middle East, and with the external factors that still from time to time playing out inside Lebanon. Troika, what's Troika? Briefly, Troika is a Russian word which means the horse carriage that is driven by three horses. So Troika has come into Lebanese politics as a term that the society, I mean, the politics of Lebanon is run by three top posts in Lebanon: the president, the prime minister, and the speaker, the president of the parliament. When these three persons agree, then the state affair runs smoothly. And sometimes when they are not in agreement, then there are some issues come up. So that's why Troika is a like phenomena in Lebanon, which sometimes has negative connotation. But again, I would say that the system is running. There should be, of course, some amendment, but there is no other way, in my opinion, but consociationalism and consensus in Lebanon. In plural societies, the only solution is dialogue, like Professor said, is dialogue and consensus. There should be an agreement. So I said the problem is not in Taif, but it is in the implementation. Like I said, with the Troika or with the external factors that still are affecting Lebanon. So finally, constitutional democracy should not overlook the necessity of changes. It is there, it should be there. Constitutionalism should be there, but again, there should be some amendments to that. That's it for now, and thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, we're running out of time, so if somebody has some questions, either to the ambassador or to me, or to any of you, our friend, so we will come. Make your question concise, to the point, so the answer, you will receive it, and I hope it will not be controversial. Right.
Thank you for the clarification. I think it is controversial. So what is the role of Hezbollah in the governmental institutions, and the UK banning its political wing, how is it going to impact Lebanon now? And secondly, you spoke a lot about state building. So what about Lebanon's foreign policy with regard to Kurds in Syria, or the Druze community, minority community in Israel, and also the Palestinian issue?
I have a similar question regarding Hezbollah. So I'll just ask. Same, almost same.
All right.
So in the recent election, Hezbollah has emerged as a high party with the highest votes, almost double than what Future Movement has got, led by Saad Alvi. So how do you, as a part of government, see this, or how does it affect your negotiation with Western powers or Saudi Arabia or any ally or
Briefly again, Hezbollah is a political party. Hezbollah has been there since 1980s, early 80s, 82. It's a political party and is represented in the parliament and in the cabinet. Maybe until 2000, from 1982 until 2000, Hezbollah didn't want to be represented in the cabinet, but was always there in the parliament, because they think that resisting Israel is their main aim. And I believe that you know that international law guarantee resisting occupation forces. So what Hezbollah did was resisting an occupation force in Lebanon, and that was legal by all means. Now Hezbollah is again in politics. Yes, we know that some government, they don't accept this fact, or some of them differentiate between the political wing and the military wing, and they how would I say, categorize the military wing as terrorist organization. For us, Hezbollah is Hezbollah, is a political entity, is a Lebanese political party, and involved in politics like any other party. And by the way, the resistance against Israel and people who held arms against the occupation of Israel were before Hezbollah, and were not Shia at all. You know, we have Christians who martyred resisting Israel. We have from all other all factions of Lebanon resisted Israel and fought Israel. So that was, for us, it's not a problem. If there any, I mean, the Western has some problem, like we heard and you heard, of course, the British recently, they said we stop categorizing, I mean, or differentiating between the military wing or the political wing. But for us, Hezbollah as one entity, is Lebanese and in the politics. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, so but the second one is how does it affect your negotiations with your
Yeah, you know, Lebanon is, like I said, a strategic player. So we hear from time to time that we will also put sanctions against Hezbollah, which will affect Lebanon also. But then again, they think, I mean, the American or the British or whatever, that sanctioning Lebanon is of no use. You know, Lebanon, there's a need of a stable Lebanon in that part of the world. You know, it's enough turmoil in Syria, in Jordan, in Yemen, in Egypt. So they want something, a stable base, which is Lebanon. So I don't think they might sanction some figures of Hezbollah, but at the end of the day, not Lebanon as a state, but of course it will affect. Like now, for example, our Minister of Public Health is not Hezbollah member, but affiliated or close to Hezbollah. So some maybe Western state wouldn't deal directly with him, but I think it's not a big deal. It wouldn't be a big deal with that. So we can manage. Maybe you mentioned about future. Yeah.
Okay, so you will tell me. Yes.
Okay, I will come back.
I will try to cover all your points. Let's see others, and then all together we'll try to.
So, no, my question is per se, I mean, I need an answer from you and from our Syrian delegates. From India when we read, I mean, we get things, our sources only from the media. I mean, looking at it, we've projected that the situation in Syria is terrible, right? That's what we are told.
Yeah.
I don't want to believe it. So, it's made to look like it's so bad that you need somebody to help you out. But looking at how Lebanon has built itself, it just gives me a sense that Syria is capable of building up by itself. So do you stand by this opinion, or do you need the help of the other parts of the world in rebuilding Syria? And the next question is, can the practice of consociationalism that you explained, can that be helpful in rebuilding the Syrian society?
Can I just comment
please.
on this question? You know, difference. If one looks at the new trend nowadays within this 21st century, from Bush, Obama, Trump, even, the trend is to convert the whole Middle Eastern countries into fragmentation, division, either according to religion and faith or tribalism, you know. Now, the fact, the situation in Lebanon as it is, from independence, and as the ambassador said, they inherited it from the French. But it is nothing in the constitution that would say this. Now, at that particular time, 1920, 1925, 6, 40, there was a rising trend of Arabism. And Arabism, I believe, still is the only solution to help the Arab world in general get rid of any drawback, of any conflict, of any confrontation. That's why you could see, for example, in Syria, the system is not built on ethnicities, on religious basis, faith. It is built on political. And there is in Syria, in a similar way, a kind of collective agreement. There is, for example, a National Progressive Front, which has been established in 1971 by later President Hafez al-Assad, which constituted 6 main political parties. But none of the parties has the character, a feature of religious, nor of ethnicity, because that is a kind of very serious that can erupt and would not lead to a kind of stability. It could, in a way, held conciliational agreement among the leaders. Now, some people say, yeah, that conciliational is what the Americans and the British and the French have done now in Iraq. Now, if you could see, after the Iraq regime, Saddam Hussein was toppled, they found a similar model. And that model is that the president of Iraq is Kurdish, the prime minister is Sunni, and the speaker is, a Shia. That is very serious, that is very frightening, that is very, and this is what they are trying now to do in Syria. But which they failed, of course, because they do it when there is a failed state, when there is a weaker state. Yes, the Lebanese managed to get out of it, yeah, with their will, but had it the international situation and regional environment at that time was helpful. Syria in Lebanon, my friend knows, sacrificed a lot. And I can say during the deterrence force and so on, Syria did not go to Lebanon just like that. It is exactly like when the Russians now come to Syria at the invitation of this legitimate government of Syria. Syria went there because it was asked by the legitimate government of Lebanon to help, and knows it is the interest of Syria is to protect Lebanon, because believing in the fact that, contingency, which I speak, contagious disease, if there is no stability in Lebanon, it will be reflected on Syria, and vice versa. Unfortunately, the Europeans do not understand this. The Europeans, if there is no stability in the Middle East, there will be no stability in Europe. And if there is stability, there is prosperity, stability, better chances for, cooperation. If you go to the Northern African, among the Arabs, we can see this division of people and political system is not on religious. It is based on a tribal, See now what's happening in Algeria and Morocco, Western Sahara, Berber issue, Libya, tribal. Now I believe the only solution for this, first you need a kind of international environment that would help, and I think it is getting ripe now, that continuation of such wars will violate the very principle of the name and will paint the very direct picture in the mindset of the world against those who are promoting this kind of, dirty wars. Democracy is needed, reform is needed, a better understanding is needed. So what is it? Arabism? Nationalism and Arabism are convergent with each other. But Arabism, all Arab countries are Arabs, regardless of Sunni, Muslim, Shia, Christian, Protestant, or whatever, Druze. But I am an Arab living in this region. Nilly-willy, we have to cooperate. Nilly-willy, we have to do it better. Because believing if my hand has a problem, then the whole body will have a problem. So that's why we have to help each other in this world. And see, I always give this example. 29 Indian states, 1.2 and more billion, different, type of degrees of development, but still they are living in peace, and still you need the system, but still you need the power to maintain the system without allowing others to interfere.
Yeah.
Any interference did not last forever. That's why, imagine, Germans, when Germany was divided, even the Western German constitution says that still they do not recognize this partition and this division of. That's why they reunited. Korea now, North Korea and South Korea, there are talks about how to. If Europe, different nationalities and so on, are uniting, agreeing on a certain common policy, why not the Arabs? Why not the Arabs? They have old civilization, they have good natural resources, very important strategic position, they have common culture, and they have nothing in between, but it is, to make them apart from each other. But it is not in the interest, neither of the Ottomans, nor of the Americans, nor of the Westerns, to have this big Arab nation. So we always have to keep in mind, yes, future generations will do better than what we are doing, hopefully. And we have done something more than what our ancestors have done. Now, this is a challenge for governance, challenge for state building, but in the age of knowledge, in the age of information, everything is possible. We have still to learn how to live together. Nilly-willy, but in peace and security, but in dignity. And that dignity cannot be manifested except by leave me alone to decide what is good for me. I am rational enough to look for believing that if you are good, I am good. And if I am good, you are good. And this is political science, one for all and all for one. I believe we are run of time, but thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. If the others, may I ask Mr. Dijes just to honor the ambassador with decorating His Excellency with a scarf. It's getting cold outside.